Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zeckthar.
And I'm Yuksen.
And we are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires, and for the next couple of months we'll be discussing the tumultuous history of the world of Armageddon.
That's right, Zeckthar, and this week we'll be discussing the First War of Armageddon. But tell me, brother, why did Angron invade the planet? Other than it sounds like what he would name a planet.
Well, it all starts at the end of the Great Scouring. But before we start, some info on upcoming things on the channel.
Really?
Yes, indeed. I'm afraid, Yuksen, we simply don't have enough questions at the end of every month to justify a Q&A for a whole episode.
I know, brother. In fact, I've known for quite some time. I just didn't have the heart to tell you. Also, much props to Hermes for realizing this and scrambling at the end of the month to try to come up with a bunch of questions.
Quite right, brother. Much thanks to our member Hermes. But you listeners may be asking, what will we do with the questions you do ask us? And what will we do at the end of the month? Well, at the end of the month, we are going to kind of wing it. But with the questions you send us, we'll answer them when we get them. Like this one that came from our podcast from Nathan T. And he wrote, since you mentioned void combat, what exactly is a Geller field? And how does it work? And if ships do travel through the Immaterium and there are demons there, can they attack and board Imperial vessels traveling through it? Okay, so real quick, the Geller field is made from the Geller field device, which emits an energetic, invisible force field comprised of unknown subatomic particles called a Geller field, which essentially maintains a bubble of real space-time around a starship traveling through the warp using the power of its sublight drives after utilizing its warp drive to pierce the veil between the physical universe and the warp. Now, since entities native to the Immaterium, like demons, cannot breach its boundaries to enter the physical universe except under certain very specialized circumstances, creatures native to the warp are repelled from the boundaries of the projected Geller field. Now, warp entities would tear the ship apart to reach and consume the souls of the mortal crew. As such, the field must be active at all times. For the field to work, the starship must be entirely sealed. No open entrances that would breach the field's protective envelope are allowed. Now, if, for instance, anyways, that entirety isn't completely sealed, then yes, that's how a lot of ships are actually lost in the warp, is that demons will eventually board them and the ship ends up exploding normally.
Which we also kind of reference in our prior Vox when it came to the fact that the Geller fields failed on a couple of them. That's why demons flooded into the different ships during the Terran Crusade.
Right. So if your Geller field stays up, then you're good, pretty much. If it starts to go down and you're in the warp, then you just normally what happens is they try to get out of the warp as quick as possible. So, like my brother just said, demons don't swarm the ship.
Well, unless it's an orc and they don't really care much for Geller fields to be.
Yeah, speaking of which, anyways, not all warp traveling entities actually use Geller fields. The orcs don't. For good cause, too, right, Yuksen?
Yeah. I mean, let's face it, it's in-flight entertainment. Free fights. I mean...
It's kind of confusing how orcs do it. I think they just pretty much use Wog energy, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Which doesn't work very well.
Like anybody's really gone up to an orc and say, tell me how you go from one place to another via the warp. And even if they did, and were able to somehow get to talk intelligently, what would it say?
I don't know.
Something along the lines of, I don't know. Probably.
Yeah, so most people think anyways it's their psychic Wah energy, but it doesn't work incredibly well. And one of the reasons why we think that is because, like Yuksen just said, in-flight entertainment. So they can let some of the demons in so that they've got some good crumping to do while they're waiting to get through the warp so they don't just get bored.
Right.
The other races normally, actually pretty much all the other races other than the Voton, who the Voton use a Geller ramp, which is just a better version of a Geller shield.
Yeah, the Geller rampart.
Yes, the Geller rampart. then the Tau, they don't actually use the warp. They've figured out a way to do faster than light travel, but it's slower than going from the warp. So the way we've kind of expressed it anyways is the best way to describe warp travel is like if you take a piece of paper and you fold it in half, and then you take a pencil and you push it through the middle of that paper that you folded in half. So the ship is the piece of paper, it goes through, and then it comes out the other side of the paper, right?
You mean it's the pencil, right?
Or the pencil, yeah, sorry. But you know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
It's probably the best way to describe warp travel. The Tau, on the other hand, use faster than light travel, which is they don't use that whole we go from point A into a fourth dimension to point B. They just go really, really fast through space, which to me anyways is, first off, it's kind of impressive, and it's kind of, I would think that would be just as dangerous. I mean, what if you don't know that there's a rock out there? It's got your name on it, and you're hitting it at faster than light travel. But
Well, I believe we mentioned this when we talked about the Tau also, but they tried once doing warp travel, and
they have tried it a couple of times, and it seems like they're getting closer to figuring out how to do it. But at this point, anyways, every time that they've tried, it's just turned into a horrible disaster.
Yeah.
Normally ending up with hundreds of thousands of Tau dead or just randomly transported to some other part of the galaxy, and they don't know how to get back home. The Eldar, the Drukhari, obviously they use the webway from the old ones. I think probably the most interesting is the Necrons. The Necrons.
Wait, is the webway actually entirely made by the old ones, or is it partially done by the Eldar?
I believe it was originally, I think it was originally made by the old ones.
Okay.
But the Necrons, anyways, they don't travel through the warp at all. Instead, they use dolmen gates. And dolmen gates are pretty much a secret hack code for the webway. If they want to go through the webway, they just turn on a gate and they can open it up and drop out somewhere else. So I hope that answers your question, Nathan. We did have one more question, and that came from our YouTube channel. Yuksen?
Well, our second question comes from Miles2378, and he asks, what threats to the Imperium is Gilliman ignoring? Now, in my opinion, it's less he's ignoring and more putting most of them on the back burner.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so I think there's a couple things here anyways. First off, anyways, I think that there's a lot of stuff in the Imperium that he's ignorant of, which is different than ignoring.
Right.
Because the Empire is so big, he can't be everywhere at once. Like I was talking to Yuksen about this yesterday. It's like, oh, there's a riot in Brussels, on the planet of Brussels. And he probably doesn't know about that, you know?
Right.
So I wouldn't say that he's ignoring those. I'd say he's ignorant of them. Now, the stuff that ignoring, I mean, I think he's just kind of prioritizing everything. And there's some stuff that he prioritizes, like you said, Yuksen. I think there's some stuff he prioritizes more than others, like chaos.
Right now, I think it's mainly dealing with what's happened via the Great Rift.
Yeah, chaos, the Great Rift, trying to figure out how to get the Empire, anyways, back into one cohesive unit instead of split in half. I mean, I'm pretty sure, anyways, that is where most of his main focus is. I mean, now, I also think, anyways, he's also probably got his eye on, like, for instance, the Tyranids. And making sure, anyways, that he's keeping them in check, along with the Tau. I mean, the Tau, he's probably, that's more of probably, like, he checks his email about it once every 3 months, you know. Are they still over there? Yeah, they're still over there. Okay, whatever, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he's probably
on his
very low on his totem pole. And probably, I mean, he probably is not even thinking about, like, for instance, the Votan, the Drukhari, or the Eldari. Those are probably not even, anyways, in his wheelhouse.
Right.
So, I mean, I think, quite frankly, his two big ones, like you said, anyways, I think most of it, anyways, has to do with the Great Rift. And the second probably is the Tyranids.
Yeah.
And then you can just go down the list from there. But purposely ignoring, you don't know if there's anything that he's like on purpose ignoring. Like, we don't have to worry about that. That doesn't sound very much like Gilliman.
If he was doing that, it'd probably be, I think, actually the Voton would be the thing they'd be the least concerned about.
Right. The Voton, they're getting grumbly. They're always grumbly. Moving on.
Well, thanks, guys, for the questions. And if you guys have any more, by all means, send them our way. And we will try to get to them when we can. And who knows? Maybe we will start getting enough that we'll bring back the Q&A at the end of the month.
Indeed. But getting back to the World Eaters, our story starts after the Great Scouring, when the 12th Legion was chased back into the Eye of Terror. While thoroughly thrashed by the Imperium, they were still one cohesive unit, under the banner of their Primarch demon, Prince Angron. This was all about to change, though, when they came upon the demon world of Scalathrax. Now, Angron figured it to be a pretty good world to kick back on for a bit. And besides, to claim the world, they would have to crush a group of Emperor's children, which sounded like something his patron Khorne would enjoy. After a full day of vicious fighting, the deeply frigid Scalathrax night began. Horrified by environmental conditions so cold that they affected even the superhuman metabolism of Astartes. It was so cold that they could even kill a Chaos Space Marine in a matter of moments during the deepest portions of the long night. Now, due to this, the battle was called off temporarily due to severe weather, and both sides took to their shelters. Well, everyone but Karn, that is. And as the freezing night continued on, Karn fell into a terrible rage over the idea of being delayed from his slaughter for even a single night. Mad when he saw his fellow legionnaires creeping back to their shelters like cowards, he took up a flamer and burned them to ash, slaying with his chain axe Gorechild any who tried to stand against him. Now, during the ensuing chaos, Karn was assaulted by 3 unknown assailants. Undeterred, the berserker leapt at his foes. A stray bolter round struck Karn in his breastplate, sending his sleep wide, forcing him to dispatch the concealed warrior with an improvised backhand strike of his chain axe. He then whirled around and clove through the bolter of the 3rd assailant before slamming him insensible to the ground. He then hurled Gorechild to his left. The chain axe bit deep into the throat of the last Astartes. Arterial blood sprang into the air. Standing over the prone warrior as he attempted to scramble for his weapon, Karn recognized the face of his assailant. It was his old trainer from his first days with the 12th Legion, Centurion Grunnar. Backed into a corner amongst the bodies of his fallen brethren, Grunnar spoke of madness and betrayal, cursing Karn for daring to strike down the battle brothers of his own legion. Karn would hear none of it, and cut down Grunnar where he stood. As the foremost berserker champion of the 12th Legion, Karn had stood upon the walls of the Imperial Palace during the last hours of the World Eater's great campaign in service to Khorne upon the sacred soil of mankind's homeworld. He had been the last to be borne away from Terra after Horus's assault had failed, his body broken after he had slain 1 million of the false emperor's lackeys through the breach of the Imperial Palace's defenses at the Lion's Gate. None alive amongst the mortal servants of the Blood God would ever surpass his tally of kills. The contest that Karn had proclaimed, for which berserkers could claim the most skulls on behalf of the 12th Legion's patron, Chaos God, was finally over, and he had been its victor. Karn believed that it was the weakness of his fellow traitor Space Marines that had led to their defeat during the Battle of Terra, the weakness of the other traitor legions, as well as the weakness found amongst his own brethren in the World Eaters. Filled with disgust for his fellow Astartes' weakness, the Chosen of Khorne continued to slay Emperor's children and World Eaters alike, earning him the title of the Betrayer from the other World Eaters. His actions on Scalathrax shattered his legion's unity and reduced it to scattered individual war bands of Khornate berserkers that would reave through the Eye of Terror and beyond for the next 10,000 standard years. Yet the Blood God was ultimately pleased with the slaughter, even as the demon Primarch Angron's legion ceased to exist as a coherent military entity. Undeterred, though, Angron spent the next 10,000 years gathering as many of his sons to his side as he planned on setting up a planet in the Materium, so the rest of his World Eaters would swarm to it like a blood-red light. All he needed was the transport, and then, in 444.M41, a space hulk named the Devourer of Stars entered his homeworld's orbit. and, seeing his opportunity, hopped aboard and set sail to the Imperium of Man.
Now, the arrival of Angron at Armageddon probably had nothing to do with Angron's own desires. Rather, the location was determined by the chaotic currents of the war, which sent his space hulk to Armageddon, possibly at the whim of one of the gods of chaos. More than likely, Khorne. If there's any intent behind the Devourer of Stars course at all. Meanwhile, on Armageddon, a series of strange events culminated in an armed rebellion breaking out in half a dozen of the world's large hive cities against the Imperium's authority at the same time that massive warp storms cut off the world from Imperial communications and commerce. The revolts, largely initiated by the Chaos Cultists, taking advantage of food shortages caused by the warp storms to stir up trouble, were quickly put down on the eastern region of the world's southern subcontinent of Armageddon's Secundus. But amongst the more widely scattered hives of the western region of the northern subcontinent of Armageddon Prime, the rebels proved more difficult to eradicate. As Armageddon's planetary defense forces and the few regiments of the Imperial Guard's Armageddon Steel Legion present on the world seemed capable of dealing with the revolt, no additional units were sent by the Imperium to deal with the problem once the warp storms cleared. Armageddon was a very long way from the Eye of Terror in the galaxy's Segmentum Obscurus, and no one in the Imperium suspected any more sinister cause for the revolts than simple civil unrest. Busy containing the rebellion, the Imperial forces were caught by surprise when the Space Hulk, Devourer of Stars, suddenly emerged from the warp in the Armageddon system. On board the Devourer of Stars, an enormous Chaos army led by the demon Primarch Angron, including millions of Chaos cultists known as the Children of Sanguinary Unholiness, and the 12, the Crore Praetoria, the 12 strongest demons of Khorne, whose lives and deeds most pleased their wretched blood god. Chaos Space Marines from the World Eater's Legion and hordes of other demonic creatures dedicated to the blood god also poured from the Space Hulk onto the surface of Armageddon and swept across the land. The insidious effects of chaos were quickly felt as nearly half the planetary defense force of Armageddon unexpectedly went over to the invaders, declaring their loyalty to the ruinous powers of chaos. The few remaining loyalist defenders were quickly routed from the continent of Armageddon Prime, falling back through the equatorial jungles in the south. The survivors joined up with the Imperial PDF units that had been left on the continent of Armageddon Secundus and prepared to make a last-ditch defense along the rivers of the Styx and Charon. Now, before I open the floor to discussion, I'd like to talk about Castellax the Forsworn.
Ooh, Yuksen, it's been a while since we've talked about a Chaos Space Marine. I think it's what? Iron Warriors? I think that's the last time we
Yeah.
talk about it.
So
By all means, though.
3-4 months ago?
Oh, yeah, right before we did Imperial Fist, so I want to say middle summer.
Right.
But by all means, yeah, let's hear about this guy.
Okay, so Castellax was originally Sergeant of the World Eater's 3rd Assault Company and was known as Solax at the time. He had been trained on Bod, took part in the Genna massacre, and then betrayed his brothers at Isfon III. A remarkable officer who never rose particularly high, Solax survived the heresy all the way to the Siege of Terra. There, his rhino transporter Barbarous was documented by the Imperium. This sighting later allowed the Imperials to identify Solax as Castellax. Neither Solax nor the rest of his company came near the Imperial throne room during the battle on Terra, as their strength was broken by the Imperial Fists and Blood Angels during the early siege. However, following Angron's defeat to Sanguinius and the death of Horus, the traitor invasion of Terra broke. Solax and his comrades escaped from Terra, but they were relentlessly pursued by the Loyalists. It was when Solax's captain, Shaka, took the Conqueror and fled, leaving most of the 3rd Assault Company behind to die on another ship. Solex led his brothers in a desperate retreat and never forgave Shaka for the betrayal. After Shaka's desertion, Solex emerged as acting captain of the Third Company and commander of the Furious Aggression. After discovering the world of Scalathrax, Solex opposed the Devourer Gogur's desire to attack the Emperor's children, warning that he would lead the Third Company from the system at the first sign of aggression by Gogor. Solex was later part of Karn's deputation that met with the Emperor's children. However, the meeting devolved into slaughter when Karn inspired Captain Drieger to open fire. Solex's misgivings over an attack on Scalathrax were ultimately proven correct, as the Battle of Scalathrax broke the World Eater's Legion. From then on, he held a low opinion of both Karn as well as Angron for destroying the World Eater's unity during the heresy and at Scalathrax. Eventually, he became a powerful Chaos Lord in his own right, and thought like Abaddon, believing himself able to resist madness and full corruption by chaos. He took the name Koslox the Forsworn, killing anyone who kept using the name Solex. Distrusting the sanity and ambition of most of his gene brothers, Koslox began to recruit and breed human mutants as followers. These became his guards, bondsmen, and technicians. Though he continued to employ some world eaters as advisors, he largely relied on the mortal mutants to manage his resources and logistics. Now, do you have any thoughts on this particular individual or how the invasion started?
Well, first off, this Castle X fella. What is he up to now? Is he still following Angron around?
He got left behind actually. But
What? What do you mean?
I don't think we mentioned it later, but he gets left behind.
That seems to be a recurring pattern for him. No wonder he doesn't like anybody in the World Eaters. They just keep leaving me.
One of the next time I think he pops up and he actually has the Conqueror, which means he probably killed Shaka.
Well, there you go. Well,
more than likely.
So, I don't know.
And is part of the 13th Black Crusade.
Okay. So he's now hanging out with Abaddon?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. So it seems like, well, he obviously doesn't like Karn at all. And he may not like Angron. It seems like he still follows Angron whenever he pops back up again, though.
Well, Angron didn't like the fact that at one point he was calling himself Lord Regent of the World Eaters. So
Angron didn't?
Abaddon didn't.
Oh, Abaddon didn't. Oh, I was saying Angron. But yeah, Kazrax seems kind of like an interesting fellow. He seems far more intent on surviving than blood for the blood god, skull for the skull thrones.
Yeah.
Wonder what would have happened. Wonder what would have happened if the warp had just spat him out at like Fenris or Cadia. That would have been interesting. Wonder how that would have worked out. But of all places, it happened to be Armageddon, huh?
Well, Armageddon, one of the things about Armageddon, though, is how it had that. It really didn't help that it had all of those things happening before he reached there.
Oh, you mean like the warp storm?
Massively different if the revolts and rioting hadn't occurred beforehand.
Well, I figured anyways, a lot of that was caused because he was on his way. It's kind of like how, we were talking about with Scarbrand, when we were talking about the Terran Crusade, how when he started to get close to humans anyways, they would just start going nuts and just want to murder everything. I figured this was kind of the same concept, but I mean, I could be wrong. It could be just that he just happened to have perfect timing, which happens more often than you would think.
Well, I can see it being more of he was being directed that way because it had been happening on that planet.
Oh, okay. So you're thinking more along the lines of it wasn't his cause. It was like a beacon directing him.
Because it was
Gotcha.
or he was directed that way because of it.
Right.
Because if you look at it, the true betrayals from like the PDF and the Steel Legion didn't happen until after he had gotten there.
Right.
Which sort of assumes the fact that before he got there really wasn't that much of an influence because of him being on his way.
Okay, so you're thinking it was more along the lines of it was a beacon to his Space Hulk, not the other way around.
I think he was directed to that particular area because of the fact that not necessarily a beacon.
Okay,
it's kind of like, okay, all these chaos cultists and all these revolts are happening here. And so somebody decides, okay, I will now push Angron's fleet in that direction. Or sorry, the Space Hulk in that direction. What you're talking about is basically them being magnetically drawn.
Yeah, that's what it sounded like you were talking about. So you're thinking that somebody was actually guiding his Space Hulk there? It sounded like it was just kind of spontaneous. And it might have been, maybe Korn might have shoved him in that direction, but it seems like it could have been anything.
Well, if it was, for example, Chaos is directing it, I can see it being like that.
Okay. Well,
where
regardless, he shows up on Armageddon.
Right.
And when he shows up, it doesn't take him long anyways to start butchering everybody, which, I mean, the War of Armageddon doesn't start very good. But the hardy people of Armageddon were quick to respond. But not only that, but they had an ace up their sleeve. Now, unknown to the forces of chaos, the great companies of the Space Wolves and Astartes, led by the chapter's great wolf, Logan Grimnar, have been assigned to this sector of the Imperium, and they move quickly to provide aid to the beleaguered defenders as soon as they receive the astropathic distress messages from Armageddon describing the chaotic invasion of the Hive world. Now, for those of you who missed our Vox on the notable wolves of Fenris, let me enlighten you as to who mighty Logan Grimnar is. Not since the time of Leman Russ has the chapter known such a leader. The Wolf Lord's ascension to Great Wolf seemed to be blessed by the great Primarch himself. Grimnar is a figure of awe, not just upon Fenris, but across the breadth of humanity's domain. To say Logan is popular is to say the stars in the sky are plentiful. He is the warrior king of the Space Wolves, a wise and cunning leader of men, whose adulation borders upon worship on many Imperial worlds. The old wolf inspires such unshakable loyalty that he has led the Sons of Russ into unimaginable terrors and emerged with victory grasped firmly in his claws. Under Grimnar's command, men and women become heroes, and heroes become legends. Now, the great wolf, Logan Grimnar, has ruled the Space Wolves chapter for over 500 standard years, and has claimed countless great victories during his reign. He is a hero like no other, renowned across the Imperium as both savior and warrior king. He has led the Sons of Russ in countless battles, changing the course of history time and again with his deeds. Yet, during the First War of Armageddon, Logan was still fairly young, and in fact, this was his first major action as the Great Wolf. Realizing how big a threat on Armageddon was, Logan brought the entirety of the Space Wolves to bear as he made planetfall, quickly helping the beleaguered Imperial defenders. They gained valuable time as Angron raised bloody monuments from the wreckage of the dead instead of pressing his advantage. In addition, his power was dependent on a nearby warp storm, and when it lulled, the defenders gained precious time to organize a counterattack. Now, while I said Logan was young at the time, and he was, I don't mean he was ignorant of the ways of war. It simply means the fires of youth still blazed in his eyes. Few Space Wolf battle brothers had ever seen a warrior as skilled or a general so gifted as Grimnar. However, what made the Great Wolf stand out from his brothers was the boundless charisma he wielded like a weapon. His easy grin and ready jests earned him the trust of everyone he met, even the old and cynical Longfangs of the company, who grudgingly admitted they had warmed to the whelp. It didn't take long for the defenders who stood in his presence to be swayed by his rich, booming voice. Thus, with a sly smile and a booming laugh, Grimnar's commanding presence and charisma rallied the terrified defenders of Armageddon. And when Angron's army emerged from the jungles that separated Armageddon Prime from Armageddon Secundus, they found the defenders ready and waiting, and reinforced by the Space Wolves. Huge battles erupted along the entire front. The Space Wolves were outnumbered 1,000 to 1. But nonetheless, Grimnar led the charge, as was his wont. Taking the fight to the Chaos Horde, the Great Wolf led an armored assault straight across the river Sharon into the World Eater Horde, inflicting heavy losses on the traders before withdrawing. The enraged World Eaters pursued the Space Wolves' mechanized force into the jungle, falling into the combined Space Wolf Steel Legion ambush along the Sharon and slaughtered them. The Space Wolves waded into the river itself and set about the Chaos Horde in a mad frenzy, battling for hours and holding the line. However, in the west, the assault along the river Styx was spearheaded by Angron himself and his bloody bodyguard, the Crya Praetoria. The Primarch and his bloodthirsters smashed through the Imperial lines and led his forces towards Hive Infernus and Hive Hell's Reach. The Imperial Guard and Space Wolf forces managed to desperately hold the line and bought just enough time for the Imperium to unleash the secret weapon. But before you get to that, Yuksen, what do you think of this young Great Wolf and his quick response to Angron's threat on the planet?
Well, first of all, for it being almost a knee-jerk response at the beginning, I think it was phenomenal.
What do you mean by a knee-jerk response?
I mean, like, oh, great, you're just set upon this pretty much just, you don't really have much of a viewpoint of what's actually happening. So, go. You're supposed to save Armageddon. Go. Are you going to give me any vast amount of information? No.
We don't have any.
You don't have any.
We'll figure it out.
You're going to have to wing it.
Yeah. We'll figure it out once we get there. Okay. Cool. I have to say,
young is pretty relative. I mean, the fact that this was probably his first huge engagement, being young is relative for a chapter master. Yes, that is young.
Incredibly young. So we talked about it. We tried to figure out he's about. Hey, hang on. So we talked about this before we did this Vox, and we kind of figured anyways at this point in time of the First War of Armageddon, he was somewhere around 133 to 140 years old.
Well, judging by when we did our research, he was first time that he's recorded as doing something, which was before he was even a space marine. It was done in 313.m41.
Right.
So it would have been 131 years after that.
Okay. So somewhere between 131 years old and 140.
Well,
because there should be anyway.
Older than 131, or else he.
You don't see him running around there anyways as a baby with an axe, killing thing. I kind of do.
Just born. Here's your axe.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, he was still fairly young anyways. I mean, Longfangs anyways, I mean, I could see why anyways the Longfangs kind of still called him a whelp.
Well,
I mean,
yeah, but they're also Longfangs. Let's put it this way. For a chapter master, he was considered young.
Incredibly young.
He would be in that range of being moderate aged, I want to say, for a space marine, because some of them last very short, some of them last very long. So it's a little bit harder to judge.
Well, it's the whole it's that whole constant, being at war thing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't take a bullet if you don't eat a bullet as a space marine, you can last a really long time. Like, the oldest guy is Dante, and he's over 1,000 years old.
Isn't in a dreadnought, anyways.
Yeah, that's not in a dreadnought, and he's more than 1,000 years old, and he's still kicking the crap out of things. So
yeah.
And Grimnar at this point, anyways, we kind of figured he's somewhere around like 700 to 800 years old. So, see, the frustrating part is we don't know exactly how old he is, because at the turn of the century, Gilliman pops back up again and he goes, "Oh yeah, people screwed up the timeline, so now we got to figure out anyways." Remember he built that whole Inquisition thing on trying to figure out exactly what date it was.
Yeah. So now it's just, oh yeah, it's M42. We think,
depending on who you talk to, it's still M41. to other people. So it's incredibly frustrating. But anyways, yeah.
Oh,
Grimnar-
even worse. Technically, he became a chapter master in theory. 1 year prior to
yeah.
Armageddon.
So like I said, this was kind of his first introduction to the big dance as the Great Wolf.
Yeah.
So, and quite frankly, anyways, I agree with you. Anyways, I think, anyways, well, at least at this point, anyways, I think he's done a pretty good job reacting and then setting down and getting everything squared away. I mean, when you're outnumbered 1,000 to 1 and you're still holding your own, you're doing okay. Let's put it that way. But go ahead and tell us, Yuksen, what is this secret weapon that the space wolves have been holding at bay?
Well, that would be the Grey Knights.
Oh.
In particular, the Third Brotherhood. Only the Grey Knights had the ability to truly defeat a demonic entity of such malevolent power as Angron. As the very existence of chaos was one of the most closely guarded secrets of the Imperium of Man, few amongst even the Space Marines knew of the existence of the Grey Knights. The most elite chapter of Astartes ever formed, who were tasked specifically with combat against demons. But Grimnar had seen them in action on more than one occasion, and as the Lord of an Astartes chapter, he had never been forced to submit to the mind wipe that was required of nearly all witnesses to the Grey Knights in action. Amongst the Grey Knight units deployed for action on Armageddon was Squad Castion, which joined an ad hoc ragged brotherhood of Grey Knights under the command of Terramar Aurelian, the brother captain of the Third Brotherhood.
Yeah, pardon me, Yuksen. But since you discussed one of the Chaos leaders' backgrounds, how about you give us a little background on what was his name? Terramar?
Yes, splendid idea. Terramar Aurelian, called Terramar the Gold for his long list of noble deeds, was recruited from the feral world of Posul. It was clear that Aurelian was destined for greatness at an early age. His skill at arms was exceptional, and he had taken many a foe's head in battle and eaten their flesh before his 13th standard year. The sepulchral fortress monastery of the Mortifactors chapter of Space Marines orbits Posul and draws its recruits from the planet's fiercest warriors. And when the time of choosing came, there was little doubt among the tribes that the young Aurelian would be taken by the warriors from the sky. But as the chaplains of the Mortifactors prepared Aurelian for the journey back to their fortress monastery, a group of gray-armored warriors appeared from thin air and demanded they be allowed to take the youth. The chaplains of the Mortifactors refused, of course, and attacked the newcomers. But the Grey Warriors had powers beyond that of the chaplains and slew them. They took the youth to Titan, where he quickly distinguished himself in all aspects of his training, particularly with his mental fortitude and prodigious psychic potential. Aurelian quickly completed his training, fighting alongside the legendary brother captain Pelega during the Kojera incursion, and distinguished himself at the battle for the Kuronaic Basilica. On Priorin 4, Aurelian was elevated to the rank of Justicar after slaying the warp Sierra of Argento, who prophesied his death. Centuries of devoted service followed, and Aurelian slew many demons and saved uncounted lives as he smote the followers of the ruinous powers. Aurelian rose to become a brother captain of the Grey Knights, entrusted with the command of an entire company of Grey Knights and the safety of the Segmentum Solar. Getting back to the First War of Armageddon, though, when called upon, the Grey Knights teleported directly into the midst of the advancing Chaos Horde surrounding the gigantic demon Primarch, taking heavy losses from Angron's battle prowess. The Grey Knights inflicted their own punishment, and eventually Squad Castion engaged in melee with the demon Primarch. After Angron mangled the squad, the only Grey Knight left standing was Hyperion. Trying to protect a still surviving squad mate in a tremendous display of faith, power, and effort, Hyperion used his psychic abilities to shatter the Primarch's demonic sword, the hideous cornate relic known as the Black Blade, while he collapsed into unconsciousness from the sheer effort. Captain Aurelian then...
Pardon me, Yuksen, but I thought Angron had an axe.
Yeah, I thought he had two, in fact.
Oh, okay.
I guess he didn't make it.
I know he's had multiple axes that he's like broken or he's lost or he's given away, but I thought normally he used an axe. But I guess this time he decided to use the Black Blade.
Yes, which failed him.
I'm sure after this, when he got after that, anyways, it's like, you see, this is why I use an axe instead of a sword.
But you've broken so many more axes than swords. Shut up.
So one time I thought maybe I'd try something different, and it just ruined. so go ahead.
Captain Aurelian then confronted the bladeless demon Prince of Korn and managed to banish him back to the warp, though at the cost of his own life. Hyperion was one of only 13 Grey Knights to survive the battle out of 109 Astartes of the Third Brotherhood who had been deployed for the campaign. Found alive but in terrible shape by the Space Wolves on the hellish field after the battle, Hyperion soon acquired the honorific Blade Breaker for his feat. He had to be put in temporary stasis in order to survive, and underwent surgery that replaced half his face and skull with augmetics, and he eventually reported back to duty more than 4 months later. The Grey Knights had defeated the Demon Prince, hurling his spirit back into the warp, from where he could not return for over 100 Terran years. At the same time as the Grey Knights were teleporting directly into the center of the demonic force to launch their attack on the Demon Primarch, the Space Wolves launched their own massive counteroffensive all along the Imperial lines. The forces of chaos were routed after they watched their leader defeated, and only the World Eaters managed to retreat back to the Space Hulk and escape into the safety of the warp. The Imperial victory was complete and overwhelming. Now, before you continue chronicling, are there any particular opinions you may have towards the steps taken to defeat Angron and the World Eaters?
The only thing I think anyways, when we were going over this, you asked me if there was anything I would have done differently than what Logan Grimnar did. First off, I think he did a pretty good job. The only thing I could think of anyways that I might change is I might use the battle barges that I have at my disposal for orbital strikes. Maybe use a little bit more of that. I'm not saying exterminatus. I'm saying like for shelling purposes.
The only problem I see with that is you'd first have to locate some people that were actually partially covered by jungle foliage, trees and things. So I'm not sure how well you'd be able to figure out where along that line to find a bombard.
Well, probably the same way that you would with just about any other. Well, okay, so if you're doing an orbital bombardment, as far as I know anyways, it's very loosey-goosey. It is more along the lines if you're going to bombard something, and it's very much like if you see where the back of the enemy is, that's kind of where you want to be. And if you're going to do something closer, normally you have infantry on the ground that can actually tell you where they are. That could be beneficial. So, I mean, that's like I said, anyways, if you could have had, like, for instance, your Space Wolves as they were drawing backwards, anyways, back towards the river, Sharon, if they had like or sticks, if they had planted, like, for instance, beacons along those lines, it's like next time that motion senses or something like that.
Yeah.
Just drop the heavens, kind of thing. That's the only thing I could really honestly think of anyways that I might have done a little bit different. I don't know. What would you have done different? Or would you have done anything different? Because like I said before, Grimnar did a pretty good job with this. I'm not complaining at least. He did a very good job with it. It's the only thing I can think of that I would have done differently. Well, what about you?
I can't think of anything from the viewpoint of Grimnar or anybody else who was just thrown into this the way it was. I can't think of anything right offhand. I don't know what the forces on the Space Hulk were actually doing, which may have changed things. Maybe that would help explain maybe why there wasn't as much orbital bombardment.
Oh, so you're thinking anyways that the battle barges were engaged with the Space Hulk?
Or they may have been leery that if they tried orbital bombardment, the Space Hulk would somehow be able to open fire. I don't know. It's the Space Hulk. We don't. One of the wonderful things of the chronicling of the First War of Armageddon is there isn't much about
There's
the
some
chronicling of the
holes,
First
yes.
War of Armageddon.
There are definitely anyways some holes in this.
Yeah.
In some of this history. And not only that, but I mean, we would have been a little bit more, we had a little bit more understanding anyways what could have been done if it was like, for instance, like the ship you talked about anyways, the Conqueror. It's like, okay, we know what that is. It's a Gloriana class spaceship.
Right.
We could see how big that is. We could determine anyways what that is. Hulk, Space Hulk. They're
vary in size.
yeah, exactly. I mean, and weaponry
mildly.
too. What's that?
To put it mildly.
Yes. It varies in size and weaponry. It's like, who knows? Maybe they've got a couple of or cruisers that are attached to this thing, or a Necron spaceship of some sort. So
it's just like a massive rock or combination of multiple ships warped together.
It could also be just a rock.
Yeah.
So it adds a little bit of frustration on our part trying to figure out some of this stuff. But yeah, I mean, I could see that very well being one of the reasons why you didn't get any. They don't talk about any orbital bombardment. Is that they were having to deal with the Space Hulk. And who knows? Space Hulk could have been shooting at the battle barges. I mean,
yeah,
it's just not really talked about. So, but all in all, anyways, pretty well-rounded strategy.
Yeah.
Maybe the other thing, I guess, anyways, is maybe descending in 109 Grey Knights behind enemy lines. That's kind of, I mean, your whole strategy is pinned on those 109 guys.
And this is another blurry area. I cannot see 109 of them being able to spawn in the near vicinity of Angron, the way that it's kind of stated it being. Well, in my mind, I'd find that a bit on the hard side to think.
Why? I mean, they're beaming in, right?
Yeah,
they're not drop pods; they're beaming in.
It is 109 people, though.
Right. I don't get what the problem is here.
The way it's kind of stated, it's stated like, yes, they beamed like right next to them. You have 109 people surrounding one person. It's not going to be right next to them.
I'm thinking more along the lines that they were dropped like in the vicinity of where he was, and then they had to fight their way to get to him. And the reason why I kind of thought of it that way is just because, I mean, they do talk about, like, for instance, he has that bodyguard around him. So they had to get through them first to get to Angron. So, to me, anyways, when they dropped, anyways, they probably dropped as a whole 109 company, and they landed close to him, anyways. And I mean, obviously, if you drop, first off, Grey Knights, anyways, are pretty awesome. They're kind of hard to kill. If you dropped 109 of these guys and they're all ready to go, there's going to be that, you know, maybe 2-3 minutes of confusion as they just literally murder everything around them to open their way up to Angron. So I'm guessing, anyways, they probably teleported in behind Angron. Angron's at the front lines, right? So he's happily murdering away the people in front of him, and all of a sudden he turns around and here's 109 Grey Knights behind him because they literally have like just kind of mulched their way towards him. Yeah, that's kind of how I saw it.
The way they have it stated is him being teleported directly into the midst of the advancing Chaos Horde.
Right. What I'm saying is I think you're taking that way too literally. I mean, like, for instance, anyways, if someone was going to teleport next to me, it's like right next to me. It's like, yes, they could teleport 6 inches away from, you know, my tentacled feet. But Also, anyways, right next to me could be, 15 feet away or 20 feet away, especially if you're teleporting all the way from a spaceship.
Right.
It's like, it's the whole throw in the dart thing. But yeah, that's the only other thing I can think of. Just simply, that's a pretty powerful tool that you're just kind of throwing out there.
Yeah.
Maybe
having it better timing, maybe a little bit better placed.
Maybe.
Location better placed, possibly.
Or reinforcing it anyways in a different situation. If I recall right, some of the stuff that I read anyways, didn't Logan end up actually showing up there? So he pushed his way to Angron, I want to say.
No, I don't think so. So he did call them in, but he wasn't actually at that location.
Oh,
he was somewhere else.
Okay.
I assume fighting the Chaos Champion of Khorne. They ended up getting the axe from.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. If I recall right, though, he did remelt the axe down, though, right? And put new runes into it.
Well, at one point it had to be rebuilt because the way it looks now, no way. That's the way that the.
Well, not only that, but I think a lot of, like, for instance, his own troops would have problems with him wielding a Khorne axe. That was, imbued by the god of war. One of their arch enemies.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So, I like I said, if we needed, if we were going to just kind of try to poke holes in this, there's a few we could, but I think you'll agree with me. He did a pretty good job. Probably far better than I've seen a lot of stuff that we've researched anyways of people doing. I mean, we could even just talk about Cadia. I mean, it's like every time that we talk about the Imperial Guard, it was just like, oh, this is their strategies? Oh, no.
Yeah.
So it's nice anyways and kind of refreshing to see someone that actually might run a good gambit strategy-wise. It's refreshing. And on that note, we're out of time for today. Join us next time as we discuss the back end of the First War of Armageddon, known as the Months of Shame. But if you enjoyed our little show, could you please be so kind as to push that subscribe, like, or follow button? And if you wish to help us expand our work on 40k lore, by all means, support us by joining our membership program on our YouTube channel, Tales of Ashraka. Have a great day, and until next time, this is Zeckthar, signing off.